He's the Vice President for Global Technology Policy for Cisco Systems. I think many of you know him already. We also have, and I will let him introduce them as well, remote moderators. That's a bit of an incorrect title because they are not at all remote. They're right here in the room. Can you raise your hands? Yeah? Thank you. 4 remote moderators because they are moderating for up to 12 chapter sites that are providing remote access to this and other sessions. And in the question and answers, which we hope to be very energetic, we will be also hearing from those chapters as well as from people on Twitter and Facebook who are watching and listening through the audio-video streaming that we have on our website. So with that, I will turn this over to Dr. Pepper.
Thank you, Walda. And it's good to see everybody. It's a huge room, so I'm glad everybody did come down. That's great. The name of the title of the session, which I'm actually going to redefine a little bit in a moment, was "Growing a Global Internet. Do we know what that means?" I'm going to introduce the panelists first, and then redefine that a little bit, and then ask a question. We want this to be very conversational and interactive, including the remote locations, the chapters, the people who are online. It's a great session in terms of the panel. Peter Bruck, first here on my left, is the chairman of the World Summit Award and is the CEO of Research Studio in Austria. Eric Berger, down here, I'm doing this alphabetically even though the people are not sitting alphabetically, is the professor and a director of the Georgetown University Center for Secure Communications. The more detailed bios, of course, are online, so I'm not going to waste our time going into the depth. Grace Chng is the senior correspondent for the Straits Times. I love it. It's senior correspondent on the money desk. So she's really their senior correspondent for technology and business. Yeah. My job is the director of ICT in Senegal, and I think people here at ISOC know her best because she's also chair of the board of Afrinic. Patrice Lyons is corporate counsel at the Corporation for National Research Initiatives. Ernest Ndukwe is the chairman of the Openmedia Corporation, and many people know him for his very distinguished 10 years as chairman of the Nigerian Communications Commission. And then finally, at the end of the table is Alejandro Pisanty, who's professor at the National University of Mexico. So we have a broad set of perspectives, and we have a broad geography represented. So what I would like to do is maybe redefine a little bit the question, and then go to the panelists to start the conversation, and then open it up and dive deeper with you and with the people online and around the world. So, again, the title is "Growing a Global Internet. Do we know what that means?" I actually want to maybe change that a little bit and just ask the basic question. What is the global internet? But what is the global internet from the perspective of the 2.4 billion people who are the users, who are online? Not from the people here at ISOC, but from the perspective of the world. And maybe in addressing that question, what is your experience in your regions about how people think about what is the global internet and what does it mean and what does it mean to them? And then we can unpack the questions and go maybe deeper into some of the other things that we've talked about in preparing for the panel. So, actually, Alejandro, why don't you start? I know this. I had not actually said who was going to start, so it's kind of a. But you were looking at me, and that no good deed goes unpunished. So why don't you start with this? And again, from your region, from your experience, from Mexico, Latin America, what do people think of it when they think of the global internet?
Thank you, Professor Pepper, and thank you also for, I would like to thank ISOC and Walda Roseman in particular for the invitation to be in this forum, and thanks in advance for anybody who doesn't leave the room till I am off the seat. I think it's very hard to define the global internet in a way that satisfies everybody. There are different levels and layers of understanding. There are years of difference in understanding. So some people are content with having mobile access to text or even image-based, icon-based systems for very simple transactions. Others will actually demand that we leave behind the layers concept and do a lot of advanced things. What people generally will recognize as access to the global internet will be an access to interoperable networks based on open protocols, based on the IP protocol, at least for now, and I think for a decade or two from now. They will know more when it's not the internet, at least some more experienced users, they will know it's not the internet they are having access to if it's limited in the services or the contents they can access through their devices of choice. And of course, we can be more technical and say that internet access, access to the global internet has to have the 5 everythings, every port, every protocol, every content, every origin, every destination must be available. And people will react quite badly as soon as they look beyond walled gardens in, or poorly provisioned networks in developing countries and find that they don't have these 5 everythings available. So I will leave it there in order for this to be the seed, possibly, of a much better definition by the time the ball reaches Eric.
Thank you, Alejandro. The question about the walled gardens and whether that's the internet or not is a very interesting one. We'll sort of talk about that. I'm going to go to Eric now.
So not surprisingly, I look at this from a technology perspective. And we talked earlier in the first panel this morning about things of the internet and things on the internet. And when I look at the globalization of the internet, if you go back to Leonard's talk of the first message being low, it was ASCII. It wasn't even the full Latin character set. No less, Chinese, Tagalog, or any number of different character sets. And yes, thanks to the work of like John Clenson and people like that, we have now many different character sets that we can present information in. We have a lot of technologies available now on the internet as internet infrastructure for speech recognition, text-to-speech, because not everyone, we say there's some fundamentals. People need electricity, people need a phone, and in fact, you might offer for the internet that many people think of today, they need to be able to read and write, and not everybody can read and write. And we even have a lot of work in the IETF that was finished actually a while ago on international domain names. So we have all of this infrastructure of the internet. Now this next level is on the internet, is how do we encourage people to either make their content available to a more global audience and have the different local regions generate their own content in their own languages, character sets, and cultures.
Yeah. Thank you. First of all, I want to thank ISOC for this invitation. Oops. Thank you. I say I want to thank ISOC for this invitation. and this opportunity to talk about the global internet. It's not easy to answer to your question about what the global internet is, because it depends on the side of the world where on the side of the world you are. And I will talk about my experience on internet and with my governmental perspective from developing countries. If you take the case of Africa, the statistic we have now is 6.2% of internet users. And if you take that we achieve this rate in 20 years, the average is just 0.3% by year. So I think that even if the infrastructure is there, the affordability to access is not yet reached. And I think it's a chance for Africa right now to be at the earliest stage of internet supply. Then they have strong potential for growth. And if we look at the study from McKinsey, they say that the future of internet will be mobile. And if we look at the mobile progress in Africa, I think that we will be able to be part of the global internet. But right now, it's not the case. Thank you.
Thank you. I was going to go back and forth, but let's have a view from Asia first, then we'll come back to you, Ernest.
Right. Making content available locally is a challenge for Asia. I think a lot of the content that's available today is available in America, in Europe, but in Asia the content is not available because of licensing, copyright issues. So one challenge we have is people are then downloading illegally, and there's piracy. And I believe that if there is content that's available and at a reasonable price, I think that those who want to download illegally will continue to do what they want to do, but I think the majority of people will switch to paying for content that they want to view. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll come back to that because this is one of the important questions. In fact, there's another session tomorrow looking at copyright and intellectual property, but there is this availability question. And this came up yesterday for those people who are at the Business Roundtable as well. Yeah, interesting. Ernest.
Thank you very much. I wish to thank ISOC and Wilder in particular for the invitation extended to me to attend this event. And I must say that the event has been exceptionally well organized. And from the presentation this morning, it was 43 years ago that Internet started. And ISOC was born 23 years later in 1992. So I'll also like to congratulate ISOC for its important role over the years and what it stands for, which is advocating equal access to Internet for everyone. On what Internet stands for in our region, it must be said that Internet has continued to reinvent itself and has done so several times in the past 20 years. And the technologies supporting the Internet have also been undergoing tremendous changes. If we move away a bit from technology, I like to say that it's also true to say that simply Internet today is all about disseminating knowledge and about creating and consuming information, or if you like, content. And it's in the area of content I really like to talk about over this session. And I'll say that there is need for more people to participate in the creation of content, especially content that truly serves the needs of the local internet users. This has not been as good as one would wish in the African region, and definitely there is need for something to be done about that. And like Robert said, the session seeks to ask whether the internet is truly global. I guess the Secretary General of ITU answered that question this morning when he indicated that 2/3 of the world population remain unconnected to the internet. But it's also true to say that such communities cannot be discussing local content generation when even basic access does not exist. There is therefore a major link between access and local content development. And I'd like to also add here that, as Jimmy Wales indicated this morning, Africa is fast-growing infrastructure that will catalyze the reach of internet and broadband to currently unserved areas. Not too long ago, multiple landings of international submarine cables from Europe and Asia and the Americas to the shores of Africa have also indicated that some revolution is on the way. So, and with that and the creation of internet exchange points in a number of countries in the region, I have no doubt that something good will be happening in much sooner than later. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter.
Thank you, Bob. I take a slightly different view. I think when I look at the World Summit Award and what we have been doing over the last 6, 8, 9 years, especially with young people, the internet is not a technology for them. The internet is for them interactivity. And for that, that means that it's a completely new space in which to move, both in terms of interactivity on a global level, on a level where you can reach out to people irrespective of where they are, when they are, and how you met them. And the interactive nature is, I think, the real cultural turning point which the internet brought about. We are just not just in the teenage years of the technology, but we are in the infant years of understanding what interactivity does. And if you just map it onto the social media revolution, then you can see very well how this is just starting to bubble and just starting to develop. I take it what some of the people said before, that the internet, we are putting layers. I think, Eric, you said this, we are putting layers of new technology onto the internet. You know? I was just in Silicon Valley and met with some young entrepreneurs. They are developing their applications and their contents only for Facebook. For them, internet has become synonymous with what they see as the interactive space. And what we have done with chapters, ISOC chapters in Bahrain or in Belgium and in Mexico, is exactly bringing that out to show actually and to demonstrate what is actually deep content. But for young people, it means more than that. It means in terms of what we have found with the World Summit Youth Award, where we're getting young people to use the internet, mobile and fixed line, to get action on the Millennium Development Goals, we found that one of the most characteristic aspects is that the internet for them means a space of adventure, but also a space which is a room for free action. So it's not just a room to move, not just a room actually to engage and to entertain, but it is something where they want to act. And I think that this is something which is really interesting, because it shows that the technology has an enabling factor beyond what we, the people who have built the infrastructure, have envisioned. And we go into this space of where young people use it for action. And we did last year with the World Summit Youth Award a number of projects, 18 projects. 4 of the 18 winning projects came from Egypt. 2 of those projects were Power to Women, and they show actually how young women in Egypt use, for instance, the Ushahadili technology to integrate into the websites and to make something which was developed in Kenya actually for post-election violence to a real case for preventing violence against women in Cairo and in Alexandria. And I think this is just showing, the power, what the internet means to them. It means to them a way of defending themselves, but also a way of gaining actually a new kind of activity and also entitlement to action culturally, politically, as well as economically.
Thank you. Patrice.
Thank you, Bob. I also want to share my thanks to the ISOC folks for putting together a lovely meeting here. And particularly tomorrow evening, they're going to be recognizing some of the pioneers in the internet work. Tonight, that's tonight, fine. One of the things that I've been interested over the years is what it means to be the internet. And Bob, I was pleased that you teed that question up, but there was a little nuance you draw insofar as whether or not, if I understood it correctly, the more protected environment might not be the internet. I'd like to suggest going back to when Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn and a number of folks got together to debate what it meant to be the internet. This goes back in 1995. And they developed a definition, the Federal Networking Council then, it was the group that put it forward, that the internet was actually an open architecture that had certain key components, that it was a globally unique address space based on IP, its logical extensions and follow-ons, TCP/IP, its logical extensions and follow-ons, or other IP-compatible protocols, and the provision of all the services on top. They called it layered on the communication and related infrastructure. Subsequently, Bob Kahn, in the WSIS process, added the thought of integrated with, because he and Vint had been working on what they call NOBOT programs. These are mobile programs in the internet, where you don't have necessarily content versus the infrastructure, but you have an integration of the whole. This is especially important when you have software being a key component in the internet that actually could be viewed from a copyright perspective as a derivative work. And of course, many patents come into play in that environment. And when I hear folks here at the meeting talk about an open internet, I want to say, well, it's an open architecture, and the beauty of it is that you could do what you want with it. There are certain protocols and procedures based on this infrastructure, this global information system, as you were, that could actually permit you to do what you'd like. Now, as an attorney, and having represented internet activities for many, many years, and been involved in the beginning of the Internet Society, I have been interested in actual applications that have commercial value. And I know a lot of young people today, they want to sell their apps on the internet, 20 cents, 99 cents. They want to be entrepreneurs, which I think is grand. because you have to have a business. You have to support your family. You have to. This is an important part. In addition to having the social and the educational environments, to actually be able to do business. Now, we've been actually recently, and the reason I went back to this global information system as the key component is that we've been recently working on applications involving iPads and Android devices. Now, in that environment, you could ask, what's a network? You have just the device, and you have the management of the information with the device. One of the applications is in the healthcare, and there are a lot of developing countries right now that are very much interested, and also in the United States and elsewhere, interested in how to use the new technology to provide real services of value to folks. Now, you don't necessarily have to have the equivalent of what existed before. You can actually reach out and provide integrated services. You have a heart monitor, or you have a sensor for blood pressure. You can actually have, you can have prescriptions, all kinds of services in a healthcare environment. And there's a good deal of energy going into that today. My favorite one, which I raised yesterday at the Business Roundtable, has to do with legal instruments. For example, what does it mean to be a mortgage? Now, usually if you have a mortgage, more traditionally, you have it on paper. But if you get rid of the paper and you have the value, you have type mortgage, and you get the metadata that says this is a type mortgage. You can actually then establish a system using the new technology that we've been working on based on the digital object architecture, where you can uniquely identify the data structure itself and be able to have that structure be the mortgage when it moves in commerce. There's also possibilities of setting up registries to support that. So I would suggest that for many, many reasons, the Internet has grown beyond just this system where it was mostly for education and was in the university community that it originated, to have real business utility for people going forward. So that would be my take on your observation there, Bob.
So thanks, Patrice. But just a quick follow-up on that is this notion that people talk about, right, this is the Global INET, the global Internet. Yeah. So what actually makes it global in the framework that you described?
Okay, that's an excellent question. Initially, the ARPANET, and tonight they're having the party, I knew that. They went back to the ARPANET. The ARPANET was the first packet-based network. And in that context, most everybody was in the research community. And so you actually identified the wire on the machine, and you knew who was on the other side. There weren't that many people around. When it came to the Internet, and you had the ARPANET, the packet radio, and the packet satellite, and the problem then became, how do you have those interact? So the TCP/IP protocol and the IP addressing, the global unique address space, you actually identified ports on the machine. And later, in 1983, they adopted the DNS system to make it easier to remember the ports on the machine, those IP addresses. Now, the new approach that we've been working on for the last, 17 years, you actually address the units of information itself, and you resolve to those. I'm talking zeros and ones here, the actual data structure. So it's an evolution of the addressing. It's backwards compatible with what came before. You have records that you can have this digital object, we call them, could be in many different IP addresses, or it could be at a location that you just made up when you woke up in the night. So it provides a lot more flexibility, particularly using the more mobile applications that have been evolving. Does that answer?
Yeah, in part. So, but it also links back to a number of people on the panel have talked about local content, right, that actually will result in the global Internet. And the question is, makes me think about, is the global Internet require that I can get information anywhere on the globe, or is it the globalization of the use of the Internet, and what's going to drive it is local content? And by the way, it's not an either or, I don't think. It's a combination. But I'd like to, do you want to? You're sitting there nodding, and so maybe you can sort of talk about that a little bit.
Thank you. I think it's interesting to talk about the internet economy at this stage because the United States is the largest player in the global internet supply ecosystem. They capture more than 30% of the global internet revenue. And if you take the case of Africa, they capture 0% of this economy. What does it mean? Is it global, or is it just help the rest of the world using what's going on in United States or in other part of the world?
But if you look at some of the trends going forward, right? If you look at the number of users, so let's just go back, not even 20 years, let's go back 5 or 6 years, right? The number of users, the sources of content, where the servers were, the data flows, they tended to be North America and Western Europe, North and West, right? If you look now at the trends, right, the number of users and the amount of data, where the servers are, where the content's coming from, right? But particularly the number of users is moving east and south. There is the issue, and I think, Peter, in the past you've looked at the question of local content, local language, and sort of deep content. And the question is maybe this chicken and egg of what is going to pull the content and also more of the users and uses, from the where the internet, the usage started, and that's a migration which will be global, which means more users and content and data in the south and east, as well as the north and the west. You wanted to just jump in for a second, Peter.
Just on content, I think we in Africa we have also an environment where you can find people which are not literate. So with the content we have right now, we have written content. We don't have many video or voice-based content. That's why it cannot be for tomorrow to have access to this content for our people. And I think we have to think about having some research on voice-based and video-based content to be able to catch all those people who are just looking for information and don't have the chance to get them. I don't think if I answer your question.
Yeah, that's actually, I think, an excellent point. When we look at, the 5.5 or 6 billion people with mobile phones, as people talked about this morning, right? People create their own content in natural language, and it's local, right? And the question is, how does that evolve with voice content, video content, distributed by the internet? Maybe we can talk about that in a little bit, but Peter, did you want to talk about what you refer to as deep content and local content?
I mean, obviously it's clear that the game changer is mobile, and that's clear, and there's so many different kind of aspects to it that I don't wish to list them now. What we found in the World Summit Award is something very interesting. We have 8 categories. One of them is e-entertainment. One of the best e-entertainment products registered in 2010 was from Guatemala. And now I tell you the truth, nobody from the United States will ever look at e-entertainment from Guatemala. But everybody from Guatemala will look for e-entertainment from the United States. And that is something which needs to be looked at, and that's the reason why, for instance, your point about the internet economy is really very, very important. As we move into the open space of the internet, the economic issues regarding, for instance, the creation of content, the billing of content, the interaction, and so on, become an absolutely critical issue. And let me give you one last thought on this. When you go and you talk to the people, in the telecom operators, the people who are part of, the ITU crowd and things like this, they basically separate 2 things. One is the telcos, and the other one is the over-the-top companies. So there is not just one layer, but there is two completely different kind of empires. Two empires which run differently, which finance themselves differently, and which operate differently. And when we looked at the stages of development of internet in terms of the billionaires are all people on the over-the-top, okay? And they are not people who produce content, but they produce actually software-driven applications, and that is something which they do. And we have to understand that the internet is in that sense not just layered, but there's a Berlin Wall in between. And I want to, engage you in thinking about that, because it basically means who can pay for what and in which way does one make money on the other, okay? And I think that's something very, very important. So my point is the open space of the internet means nobody from the US will look at entertainment from Guatemala, but the other way around.
Go to Alejandro, then Patrice, and then Eric, and then remote moderators who are local, who are not remote, or anything coming in yet? Okay, good. So we'll do, Ernest as well. So you've been very provocative. You've gotten everybody ready to go. So we'll...
Otherwise we fall asleep.
That's right. You don't want that, right? So we'll do some up here, and then we'll go to the remote. So Alejandro?
Thank you, and I'm certainly ready to yield to Patrice if she wishes.
I just wanted to come. I appreciate. That's why when I mentioned about the definition of internet, I kind of sketched through it very quickly. But basically what they had initially is the notion of layers, because at that time, indeed, there was the two worlds, and there was concrete poured between the layers. Well, what I was trying to suggest is that in the research and development and deployment in commercial sectors more recently, there is the integration of the elements. I remember one project we had 10 years ago, and my bar association actually worked with some of the technical people. It was an 802.11 net. And the question was, how can you have transparency between different layers? Because can't you just even get rid of the notion of a layer? And I said, well, I went back to the late 80s when Vint and Bob were doing the world of nobots. You had the mobile programs, and they were going around on the internet doing various tasks. So I would suggest that perhaps, and I've had some experience now working both with the ITU, and I was counsel to the IETF Secretariat and ISOC for a number of years, that those worlds are combining. There's what they call a convergence. And along with the convergence comes dynamic new ways of managing information. Getting back to my bar association with the 802.11, they were looking at MAC addresses having visibility to different other kind of addressing schemes. And how do you make a coherent system that then can produce an effect? We actually had an experiment running these little robots around in the desert down in New Mexico, where they could pass the addressing around among them. So you can do things that are more interesting in a mobility situation. So I'm very optimistic that those worlds now see value in each other and perhaps can work more closely to integrate and make things better for the world.
I'll come back to that and ask actually a regulatory or policy question about that. Alejandro and then Ernest.
So maybe a discussion about what is the internet can be, or like what is actually a global internet. We could start asking, let me be facetious for a moment, let me be a little bit nasty, to use a word that's better translated and known outside local, very well-trained English speakers. What is electrical power? So what I teach in my physics class, electrical power is movement of electrons, and it can be made abstract by movement of Coulomb, positive charges, and I could go on and get an electrical engineer to define DC, direct and alternating current, and so forth. And they could actually, let's now ask what's the definition of electrical power for which people would come to blows. So maybe and electrical engineer in the 1920s would have fought with their fists with other electrical engineerings by saying that alternating current is not really electrical power because you cannot do this or that, or I could certainly tell the chief engineer in my computing facility, what you are providing me is not electrical power, it's just some weird electrical oscillation because it's not a sinus wave well controlled for the computers. So and of course the neighbors outside the computer center will say, electrical power is whatever gets our lights on, whatever lets us cook, and whatever lets our children's computers run without blowing a fuse. And we'll be satisfied with that. So what's the internet for which people are ready to kill or die? What's the internet for which people are ready to go out on the streets, to write letters to their legislators, to form a barricade, to come in and put out 10 million tweets, and then go marching on the streets? That's the internet which allows to communicate, to produce content, and content at that level can be two-way communications, real-time. We meet at the corner for love, we meet at the corner for a demonstration. We meet at the corner for freedom of speech. We meet at the corner for freedom of association. That's the internet people will fight for. So we have to be very open to how we define the internals of the internet. What I'm hearing for Patrice is very much more like an advanced technical discussion of a non-implemented option, which sounds more like IT on steroids. And we have to remember that for people, the internet from which they make a living is an internet, if we go to that next step, is an internet where they can set up web pages for money, where they can design them or create systems to design them, or create systems like the ones Patrice has described, like for medical management or for storefronts or whatever. That's the internet they will fight for. What they care about is it's interoperable and it's open. And they won't care whether you are doing cross-layer violations, whether you are on IPv17 for addressing, or whether you have solved the problem of frames or ATMs or whatever. What they want is an internet that can be used to communicate, to have access to knowledge, and which is not managed by an over-wise deus ex machina forcing the net to make decisions for the user.
Thank you. Ernest.
I wanted to intervene in the discussion about Americans not downloading some things from Guatemala and all that. I think that we can't expect internet to be different from the cultures of people. I said from Nigeria, I said, is it one of the states up north? And I was in Florida. I traveled to Rome about 15 years ago and went to see a friend of mine. And when he heard that I was from Nigeria, the first thing he asked about was about Fela Anikulapo Kuti, that one of the very popular musicians. And it shows you how much the environment, they are tuned to what happens in other parts of the world. So really, I wouldn't be surprised if that doesn't happen. And that's why the issue about local content is key. I'll give another example. When we were young people in those days, most music we played at discos and places like that were all foreign music. Today in Nigeria, you go to most nightclubs, they're playing Nigerian artists completely, almost, you know. So I think that is what is going to happen even with the internet. As more and more access continues to be there, and as more local content is being fed into the system, knowledge about education, you can go to the internet and download some from Harvard University or wherever. Very active on the internet. And that's why sometimes when we talk about the older ones who might be illiterate, I keep feeling that that generation will soon go, and that the next generation is likely to be made up of young, educated, well-informed people that will bridge that gap we're talking about. And I think that will be happening. It might not be immediately tomorrow, but in in some years to come. And as mobile technologies continue to improve, the lady from Senegal talked about the fact that the color of internet in Africa is mobile or wireless. As the mobile technology continues to improve and as more and more people get connected, there is no doubt that access will be more affordable, and it will also lead to more content generation and then improve that reach of many people around Africa and match that with the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric, and then we'll go to the remote.
So, in terms of the impact of the internet, relate a story from 25 years ago when I lived in Europe, and I was up in Sweden. And the person said, well, here's the difference between California entrepreneurs and Swedish entrepreneurs. In California, when the entrepreneur opens his garage door, he opens his door to a market of, well, today, 300 million people. And when the entrepreneur in Sweden opened his door, he opened his door to 3 meters of snow. If we move to today, I would actually offer, we do not have a total balance of trade. However, because of, as Patrice says, the open architecture, the ability of anyone, anywhere to create an application without permission from the government, without permission from the phone company, that we have things like this little application that was, it wasn't downloaded because it was before the web, but was emailed around and available on boards from this group in Russia, Tetris, one of the most popular games at the time, was not developed in the United States. Likewise, a bunch of guys in Estonia put together this little application that actually is probably causing the end of the telephone network, Skype. And that's used all over the world. Now, did that come from Sierra Leone? No. But why wouldn't the next killer application come from there? And that is what the difference that the internet has made, is it really has made the potential for the flat world. Is it here yet? The potential is here, and we have now starting some trickles of applications. And that's where, yes, the current model of the internet is inefficient. In fact, one of Leonard's contributions early on was proving that you couldn't possibly have interactive voice on a packet network, which we have today. There are many places where we can have many efficiencies brought in, but we would offer that we would not to have that at the cost of innovation, and particularly, let's not optimize a network for the current Western network. Have a network that's open and flexible, that people from anywhere in the globe can create the next killer application.
Thank you. We'll come back, but I do want to go to the remote.
Thanks, Pepper. So just to address the situation, we have now 129 viewers and one hub connected from Liberia, exactly Africa. And we do have in Twitter some comments from Shiva from India, and I'm just editing his points, but he was raising the question about the costs of portable connectivity. I think we talk about, the panel talked about the mobile as the new way or a way to go, but what about the costs? And also in the content discussions, the multilingualism was not exactly mentioned, so if it could be addressed. And on the chat for our platform, we do got some comments from Nigeria, Liberia, and other folks from Africa, and they were raising the question about having access to encourage content. I think this was the key of the discussion here, and how internet is not seen as a socio-economic development. And more specifically, we have a question for engineer Ernest, I'm sorry to pronounce that, Ndeye, okay, I'm sorry. So, Akintundi wants to know what is the role that telecommunications could play as the pioneer in social capabilities, since they already have the infrastructure, for example, by having a competitive environment.
Thank you. So there's a lot of questions there sort of packed in. And I do think that there's a broad question about content, access to content, cost of content. And maybe, Grace, we can, this is something that you started talking about. Why don't we, start with you? And then there's this question about, I think, the cost of actually the connections. And this is where the cost of access and the role that competition plays in bringing down the cost of access. And maybe, Ernest, you can maybe talk about what's happening now in Africa with the new submarine cables and competition that's being introduced. What has to happen next, for example, to bring that across the continent and so on. So why don't we start with Grace on the content side?
In Singapore, where I come from, broadband connection is over 95%. Our mobile penetration is 160%. So a lot of the content is available on the go as you're moving around. Where Facebook content in Singapore is primarily Facebook. We are the 6th largest user of Facebook in the world with 3 billion page views every month. Over 6 million people. Yet, so yeah. So in internet is looked at in various parts of the world differently. So in Singapore, it's actually social media, right? And that is growing very rapidly. So, my panel members have spoken about how apps have been developed, and in Singapore, the internet is used a lot by business, by entrepreneurs, technopreneurs who have started their own companies to build apps. Now, what one of our leading telcos have done is to build an integrated system, and this is where they're talking about layers, right? So instead of being a pipe carrier, now they're building upwards by saying, I want part of the over-the-top business as well. So they have started a venture fund, they have started research and development centers in the world. They are force-feeding, so to speak, to develop the apps that can be used on their mobile. And therefore, the commodity, which is the data bundles, is going to be much less, and they're going to charge on the apps. So that's one way of moving forward for them. The content that Singapore is using mostly, because we're such an open economy, is basically American and basically Hollywood, And those kinds of content are not available on a paid basis As a result, a lot of the content is torrented, it's downloaded illegally, and my belief is that if there is a way for this content to be made available for people to pay for them, then I think a lot of the people would switch to this kind of content. Right.
So, why is the content not legally available?
Okay, I think there are many licensing issues. If you take Madonna, for example, Madonna is licensed on EMI in the United States. In Asia, she is licensed on Sony. So between EMI and Sony, something has to happen, you know. And it goes on for many of the artists and recording labels as well. Amazon, for example, is not, the Kindle books are not available widely in this part, in Asia as well. So it's not Netflix and Hulu. But I must say that in this year, there are 3 or more content companies that's going to offer entertainment. And this is very interesting because they're offering entertainment which is not in English. They're offering entertainment, number 1, in Bollywood. So this is a local Singapore company that has licensed Bollywood movies from the Indian studios, and they're offering it throughout the world. And this is for the diaspora, the Indian diaspora. Another company that has started, but it's not very old, it's 2004, but it has found a model of offering content for the diaspora population, which includes Telugu, Vietnamese, Filipinos, and this is going to be worldwide, and they're going to offer it OTT on a dashboard as IPTV. There's another company that takes, like a YouTube model, but it specializes in Korean and Japanese dramas, current affairs, entertainment. It shows it for free. It allows the web, the community, to offer subtitling on a free basis. And there's a competition. I can subtitle English better, you can do it not so good, and so the community will rate us, right? And so it's now in 130 languages. And now this guy is selling his content to Hulu and Netflix, and it's a Singapore company.
And this is being done in Singapore?
It's been done in Singapore.
Why Singapore? What is it that's about Singapore that's resulting in the diversity of content, multiple languages for the rest of the world in Asia, right? Was there, from your view?
For one, the Bollywood company, it is a Singaporean who's doing it. So he is an app developer, and he saw, he's a serial entrepreneur. So he has seen how successful he can be. So he has gone to the next step and to do this particular Bollywood movie thing. Viki.com, which is the one that has the Korean and Japanese dramas, they were attracted to Singapore by Joy Ito, who is the new director of the MIT Center of New Media, by his incubator. So it's a husband and wife Korean couple with an Israeli-American who has migrated to, well, he has a Singaporean wife, so that makes it easier for him. So he comes and they started, and they've got a Series A, $25 million funding. So that values the company near $100 million. So that's going forward. The other company, the guy is Malaysian. He used to be in traditional broadcast, and when he was in Singapore, the TV station closed. He decided to start a company to sell network programming. And then along the way, he found that, hey, there is a business in offering content for the diaspora population. And so he has gone on to do this. And interestingly enough, his model is to offer it over the mobile. So he has in Malaysia, for example, a content with Telecom Malaysia called HIP TV, which is, Telugu, Vietnamese, Sinhalese, on this, and it's a paid basis. So why? Part of the reason is also the government gives incentives.
We'll come back to that.
Okay.
Yeah. Ernest, on competition, on access, on the the stuff that rides under this, internet that allows just the basic communications piece here.
what has happened over the years, the cost of mobile access has continued to drop as you have more and more lines in place. But when we talk about data and internet and broadband specifically, what has also happened is that with the landing of the submarine cables in the shores of Africa, it has also seen a drastic drop in the cost of bandwidth, especially to the operating companies. There's argument that there hasn't been that commensurate drop in the cost of bandwidth to the end user, which is what the regulators are working on at the moment to make sure that it also trickles down to the end user. So I think over time that will happen. I also think that as the mobile technology continues to improve, especially in data capabilities, Nigeria, for instance, was one of the first countries in Africa to embrace 3G technology, and we're now looking at going into 4G because data, because it has to be wireless. We're anxious to go into technologies that will enable bigger bandwidth and make internet speeds at such levels that it's easy to use internet over a wireless platform without having to spend a lot of time waiting for something to drop on your computer or to upload something. So I think that as those technologies continue to improve, I think internet penetration will become more affordable and more widespread and reach the unreached parts of the country. I want to also, at this point, maybe suggest that in speeding up the rate of internet penetration and also reducing costs, I suspect that governments in some of these countries also have a role to play in terms of facilitating infrastructure build. Because somebody mentioned it a bit the other time, in one of the sessions, I think the last session actually, where he was advocating that he hoped that some government officials were there to listen to some of the things being said here. But I think it's important to say that in some countries, governments have started putting money into building infrastructure, especially to rural areas, or even incentivizing or subsidizing building of infrastructure to those areas. One other issue that might also be important to mention here is the issue about, there was a big talk today about multi-stakeholder governance of the internet and the need for governments to participate in this kind of discussion and make sure that they understand that internet should be left to develop on its own. But however, the security challenges in the world today, including that of cyber terrorism, cyber crimes, pushing security, these things are pushing security agencies to declare that apart from the land, sea, and air borders in a country, that there is a fourth virtual border, which is a cyber border, which also needs to be policed. In discussing that, I think that ISOC and organizations of that nature, and all of us, I guess, we all must therefore continue to work very hard at making the cyberspace more secure and also adopt a multi-stakeholder approach to cybersecurity in order to keep regulators and governments at bay Otherwise, it might be an issue for the future. Thank you.
That's a really good point. Well, I'm going to, again, come back to that. We have some questions here, though. We'll take, there's 3 hands all the way in back. So what we'll do is we'll take 4 or 5. So why don't we actually go through all of the, let's get the 4 or 5 questions, right, and bring them back, and then we'll have a conversation about them. We'll start, there's the 2 gentlemen here first, you 2 questions, then we'll come here, and we're going to, then all the way back there. We'll get all of the questions on the table, and then we'll address them. So why don't we start there? Yeah, please.
I have more than a question.
Identify yourself, please.
I have more than a question, a comment, several, because I come from Sri Lanka. My name is Harsha. I represent LK, ISOC LK, ISOC Sri Lanka chapter, and also from University of Colombo. One of the things that I want to actually make is that where I come from, right, this year that we have just passed the number of mobiles in Sri Lanka past the population. So the mobile is actually growing really fast. But if you look at the computer literacy, it's about 7%. I'm sorry, the English literacy is about 7%. The computer literacy is about 25%. Now it had gone beyond English, the English literacy. So here I want to actually make a point here that for the last 10 years, you can have the content in a multimedia, plus you have text content and the data in text. And Sinhala is a complex script, which is called complex script in Indian, in the Indic languages. These are complex scripts. So one of the major problems is the computerization of that. So for the last 10 years that we struggled through to get that to be done. So one of the things that had not been discussed here actually is I think this morning also we talked about this more than about 2 billion people. So having that complex scripts on the computer and on the internet, it would really become a truly global. I mean, I'm talking about right now, the technology-wise, it's really global. I mean, the connectivity and there's access that you're going to talk about. But the other major issue is the content, text content and the data, that you need to have it in local content that actually to be addressed with the local language. And I think that's a struggle that's going on right now in this part of the world. In order to be truly global, I would assume that to have that content in the local languages. At this moment, actually, if like the tools are available right now, and for Sinhala, for instance, we have managed to get Sinhala on the computer and also on the internet. So it's in Unicode right now. But there are certain technology, technology that we have to overcome. There are certain issues that we have to overcome.
Right.
So the question is that I think we need to discuss when we are talking about truly global. This is on content on the internet that we are talking about. For that, I think you need to talk about the local content in the local languages and the technology. There are the tools have to be there also to integrate.
Okay, good. Very good point. Yeah, there, and then we'll come down and then back this way.
What I was thinking during this discussion, my name is Gustavo Mesh from the Israeli Internet Association. What I was thinking during this discussion is that there is a tension between global internet and local internet from the point of view of the user. The more users we have worldwide, the less global becomes the internet, because the higher is the communication in the same country, the higher the access, the production and the access to the content in the same country. So in many ways, over the years, my feeling, and also based in the studies that I know, is that the global technologies are a potential, but from the point of view of the user, the internet is becoming more and more local. It used to be quite different 20 years ago, where communication and content was actually in different places in the world because you didn't have much people to communicate in your country. One of the indications of that may be also the decrease in the use of email by the young generation. The young generation are using much more Facebook to communicate than email. And Facebook, although it's a global company, but the way that you select your friends actually is a way in which you bring your network in, so it is your local network. So my question to the panel is, given these two terms, global and local, how much global is the internet, but also how much local, and the tension between the two concepts over the time, over the 20 years of the internet society?
Thank you. Great question. All the way in the back, you had a question. Identify yourself and then.
Yes, my name is Boris Engelson. I am a local journalist freelance. There are two completely different ways to understand global in the realm of internet. The one has been discussed now. It's universal access across culture, etc. And the second one, I couldn't find the words to phrase it, and then unexpectedly, and that's always the way a best example comes, Mr. Alejandro referred to his former life as an electrical engineer. So give me just 1 or 2 minutes to try to phrase my question. When I was at university, I was told that electricity and light were one and same thing. After all, light is just an electromagnetic field. And recently, while discussing with an engineer in the field of optical fiber, I realized that in that context and in telecom, light and electricity are not at all the same thing. But what I want to say is that before the internet, I had one kind of globalization. It was encyclopedism. I could go to the Berkeley course of physics and find the answer to my query. And if not in the Berkeley course of physics, I knew that there was an alternative, more eccentric Feynman course of physics, and probably I would find the explanation. Today, if I access the internet through Google, I will under light probably find interior design, and under electricity, erotic psychology or something like that. So I don't want to make fun of the internet. I just mean that there are two conflicts, two definitions of globalization in conflict. The old one, which is obsolete, was encyclopedism. It had a name, science. The new one is still to be invented. And just the question of accessing equally, if you speak Telugu or Samoyedi, does not address this other very deep in its implication definition of globalization.
Thank you. We'll do the first row, then we'll come back. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Tomorrow we'll discuss about the internet over 20 years. I can read the first page of my project. For the software formula, from now forever, universal software model based on a new informational model named the informational individual. I talk about a completely new conceptual approach in software on a new model inspired from the real world. While the human individual is the final frontier of the biological entities, the informational individual becomes the final frontier of the informational entities. The internet becomes the universal network of the informational individual and on a decision-maker-centric model. today, the beginning of the third millennium, there is a chance for a big change. Informational individual opens a new universe. It is limited only about thinking, imagination, and intuition. This is the first page of my project. I worked this project for over 10 years.
And who are you? Identify yourself. Who are you? You did not.
George Mate.
Okay, great. Thank you. Makes me think a little bit about some of the things that Jimmy Wells raised this morning. Yes.
My name is Evelyn Lewis. I'm from Sierra Leone. If you hear a little bit of the American accent, that's because I went to high school and college in the U.S. So I'm always home away from home between the two countries. I got a series of points I wanted to bring up. I think we've spoken about local content, but I think more importantly on content. I said the creation of content equals copyrights. And with copyrights come the ethical standards of the information technology worker, particularly within the third world, because as you're trying to monetize content, it's one of, obviously, the reasons why people want to create content. It's not just for fun, but to monetize it. There's a huge challenge there because there's a limited enforcement of local information IP laws. So I'm looking at ways in which developing countries can actually try to help the local indigenous folks who are trying to create content and monetize it. And the other side of that also is the ethical standards for information technology workers. Because they have so much access to private information, whether they're IP information in the form of codes or methodology and things like that, there's no real enforcement even when you sign agreements with certain staff members if they leave and go somewhere else. They're able to basically go ahead and use some of those information without much being done within the judiciary system. Some of the laws are either not there or totally need some total revamping. And if you're going to try to spur the entrepreneurial spirit to get this portion, I think those are key areas that need to be addressed. Affordability is also another one that I was looking at. And I think some of the new countries who are coming on board now with fiber cables, in our case in Sierra Leone, ISOC worked with government in a quote-unquote multi-stakeholder environment whereby we were able to not only get the ICT policy that they've been working on for 7 years done in 3 months, but within the same period, the president, Ernest, the current president, was able to get the funding from World Bank to get the $31 million there. But I guess the question now is how is that going to actually get to the local, the low man on the totem pole to be able to afford being able to get onto the internet, if we want to call it a quote-unquote right for people to have. And with just one more statement on that, we typically chide the politicians for not participating enough, but in the case in Sierra Leone, I was actually very stunned as to how rapid the president actually came on board to actually support the whole project, and even sits on the ICT Council. In fact, he's the chair. I think it's only him and Paul Kagame that actually does that in Africa, and we are seeing some progress. But I think some further expertise is needed on there. And if you look at the whole information technology sector in a post-conflict country like Sierra Leone, I think many people are seeing it as a rapid path to personal development in a socio-economic sense. And I think with that, the affordability of users to be able to get it at available cost is very important, but also computer items that needs to be used. The smartphone is good for mainly informational purpose, but in terms of actually using it as one would want to learn to develop or program and things like that, it's a more difficult tool to use. So affordability of hardware is also an issue. And then I have 2 more points to make. The IXP is just starting out in Sierra Leone. Our internet exchange point, it was actually set up, and we're just on a portion of rolling that out to be able to make room for more local content and also cut down on the external bandwidth. And least but not last, I think I want to make a special appeal to those who are in certain countries or certain parts of the world that are really causing a nightmare for some of the third world countries in the area of security. Most of the hacks are coming from Eastern Asia, and Eastern Europe. And what they don't realize is that a lot of the third world countries and up-and-coming countries, some people are now using it as a basis that, listen, my information is online, I might get hacked, I might get phished. I don't see why we should actually, proceed with some of this. So it's not as important a priority. But that is something that is really, really troubling, because I looked at one of our clients' accounts. They were a bit loose on security. Of course, there needs to be a lot of local training in showing the importance of security. But I think, lastly, on that same point, I looked at that client's account. They got 100,000 attack using a site from China attacking the servers in Taiwan, because there's an underneath war going on between those two countries in terms of cyber attacks that are going on those servers.
So,
and it affects these countries because they seem to be more porous in terms of their computers. And that typically means that, you're depriving those people of being able to use their accounts and stuff like that. And they don't have the sophistication that we are now talking of to buy the thousands of dollars or millions of dollars worth of servers and
so security is clearly, one of the issues. And as a question, how do you address that? So we've had about 6 questions. Why don't we go to the panel here, and then we also have some remote. So after we go to the panel, we'll go to the remote questions, and then there's some more questions here in the room. So Alejandro, do you want to?
Thank you, Robert. I've heard a number of things. First of all, I can say I was making sure by a couple of tools that I am in Geneva in 2012, because there's a lot of déjà vu here. And I think we're still asking ourselves very basic questions, which we must keep asking ourselves, like what is the Internet? But for many of the statements that have been made, I think that we have to ask ourselves again, what is so particular about the Internet? What is the Internet, this global thing, this interoperable, universally accessible, open resource? Let's leave it as vague as resource. And I'm also very wary of calling it a resource, because all kinds of legal and philosophical implications come over, regulatory. But what is specific about the Internet in some of the discussions? What is specific for the Internet, for example, in what Grace Chng has been telling us about? It's not specific to the Internet that some media companies choose arbitrarily to license or not license content in some places. I think there's a non sequitur, there's a logical flaw in the argument that Chinese content would push out American content, and Chinese content for sale would stop illegal, let's call them illegal at least, cost-free downloads of US originated content. People will still like the American films, because it's not the Internet that is creating the image of the blonde white male or female. Ernest had a point here that is a little bit against, but it's complementary more than against Peter Brooks. There is a market for Guatemalan content in the US. Going back to that argument, there is a market for Nigerian content in Europe, because it begins with expats. It begins with, there's the largest growing market for Spanish language contents in the world is in the US, because there's 30 million Spanish speakers living in the US. So that's where there's more need for that content. And it's sold, downloaded for free, pirated, whatever, people have access to it. And yes, we are focused on content, but we should be focusing on service. And I still remember that about 10 years ago, we had declared the death of content as king and said that service is king. And we see a lot of the transactional services actually being the rule on the Internet. What's specific for the Internet in content, in language diversity, in intellectual property rights and licensing, cybercrime, information retrieval, multilingual content? For example, to our colleague from Sri Lanka, I would say most of the problems of coding content and making it findable in whatever code, language, alphabet, or script you use are solved. The one problem that's that's still in evolution for that is domain names. But an ISOC, an Internet Society hero called Norbert Klein, managed to get Microsoft and Linux converted to the Khmer alphabet of Cambodia, and it's already 10 years ago. So what is specific to the internet? I think that we have to be very careful here. What's specific to the internet in most of these cases, first, many of these are old problems that just go fast or just go global, and of course change the game. There are new things coming from the internet, this like horizontal communication, like the ability to produce applications that may be open or closed and access open or closed, public or private information more efficiently, but that's more an IT problem or and we have the broadband problem, which is again not an internet problem but a telecommunications problem, and of course they come together. But what's specific for the internet is what we have to look at, and there separate what is the internet as a technology, as a medium, and what is the new conducts for the internet. And the way we're going to address cybersecurity, for example, will include some, or intellectual property rights, copyrights, will be in part through technological measures, but in part, and ISOC, the Internet Society, has been very clear and very adamant in not creating technological measures that actually intend to try to solve problems that should be solved at a human conduct level, which means by laws, regulations, agreements, etiquette, and so forth.
Thank you. I mean, everybody wants to speak, so we're going to go back and forth. We're going to go to, Eric, did you have something? And then we're going to go to Patrice, and then Peter, and then Ernest. Yeah.
And then Bill. Oh, okay. So building on that, so one thing, and you know, we talked a lot about almost like balance of payments and things like that. So we're talking about, well, you know, can we get local content so that maybe eventually it's exported as expats come and go and all that. But I have a fundamental question: is Facebook a global application? So let's say someone in Dakar puts up a Facebook page, and as has been mentioned, that's most likely going to be accessed by their neighbors, by people in Dakar. Today, that packet for the request goes probably from Senegal to Lagos to Italy to the UK to New York to California. But then, so first of all, it's in Wolof. It is in fact local content. But then for economics, Facebook puts a server in Lagos. Is this an American thing? Is it an African thing? Is it a local thing? Then they move the server to Dakar. Is it a Senegalese thing? Is it an American thing? And the beauty of this kind of example is that is something that the internet makes different, is that it takes away the distance question. You know, if we talk about a national network, then in fact that Wolof page would never be seen in Senegal. If we make a continental network, it's not until something goes into Lagos. So by having this nice flat address system, you know, we take away those issues of distance, and that really, I would offer, contributes to the globalization of the internet.
And then, of course, there's the question, does it make a difference to the person in Dakar where the server is? Do they even care unless there's latency and or they can't get to what they want, right? Patrice.
Thank you. I was listening to the questions. I just sketched them down. And I think there was a common thread. There might have been a concept of a global internet versus a local internet, text contents versus data. In fact, if you look at it as this information space, logically linked by IP addressing or logical extensions and follow-ons, then you have this capability that can be used globally, locally, and I would suggest some of the more powerful applications I see growing are those that are neither global or local. They're communities of interest. Just a light example here, I'm looking at these beautiful flowers. I happen to be interested in Japanese flower arrangement, Ikenobo Ikebana. Now, the headquarters is in Kyoto, but we have chapters in various parts of the United States, and there's chapters in various parts of the world. So our community of interest can work together in that environment and share thoughts. Taking another example, if you happen to be a medical doctor, neurosurgeon, it doesn't really matter which country you're in. If you're a neurosurgeon, you have that capability, and you want to share your ideas and learn from one another. some of the recent metadata schemas and collections of information, which are enabled by the new technology that has been introduced in the internet environment to now enable these communities of interest to work together in a secure environment. And yes, I would share your interest in the securing the environment, because if you're going to talk about sensitive topics, and if you're talking in the medical realm, you're actually talking a sensitive topic if you're sharing information that's patient-centric. So you want to have some sort of security that that information is not going to be widely available. So I would suggest the internet as this open architecture enables communities of interest. Those communities of interest could be physically local, but they could also be communities that are throughout the world or particular parts of it. So I don't think it's an either or, global, local. I tend not to look at it that way, and I thought I'd just share that with you.
Thank you. Great point. Peter.
I think I can add to this. Obviously, we all know that what the internet has done, and I want to pick up on Alejandro's question again. What it has done is it has lowered the threshold for people who want to produce interactive content in terms of distance. Or to put it more precisely, it has wiped out the constraints of distance. And if you think about the internet started in 1969, it's in 1966 that Marshall McLuhan coined the term of the global village. But his notion of the global village was a global village of the passive recipient of broadcast signals distributed electronically through television and radio. Now what we are talking about through the internet is a global village of people who produce, who can actually generate something. And I want to come back to Sri Lanka and also what Asha said about true global and local. What I find interesting about what your example says is that you said there's a computer and internet literacy of 25%, which is higher, 4 times higher than the English literacy, okay? Which means that you're actually moving into into a space where people there produce. And the World Summit Award is partnering with ICTA, in terms of actually getting that local content in Sinhalese out. And you know that you have been, in your country, there have been entrepreneurs who have been actually most successful in making text-to-speech translations and also these kind of things in terms of lowering the threshold also on the audio side for Sinhalese. Yeah, so that is something which is very, very important.
Can I interject?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I think for the last 4 or 5 years, actually, it's been going up right now. The computer literacy rate was about 8% about five years back. About less than English, and then went to 8%, and now it has gone to 25%. Actually, government projections are 30%. So by 2015, it would be, we are trying to get to somewhere 50%. But this local language is what made it. As you pointed out, ICTA and the local language initiative.
Let me just close with this. WSA has created with the Internet Society a cookbook of how to do and use a contest mechanism in various countries, in Nigeria, in Ghana, in Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh, in terms of how to use the contest mechanism for deep content in order to actually show what is actually local language content with a global quality.
Thank you. Ernest.
And you can see me afterwards to get this cookbook.
I must say that I liked what Patrice said about community of interest. I think that's very key because when you talk about content in local language being key to declaring something global, I think that even conflicts with the other gentleman that said that the more the users, the less global the internet becomes. because by the time you have a community of interests that are local, they tend to aggregate within the internet on a local basis. But I think what I will say to that is that how much global is the internet in light of the need? I think, I'll put it the other way, the internet should be able to provide both sides of a coin. That means that it should provide a local capacity when you need to go local, and provide a global capacity when you need to go global. And that's the flexibility of that is what is critical. I also wanted to comment about the issue. Every time we talk about content, there's always that shift towards talking about intellectual property rights and all that. Quite honestly, there's so much usage on the internet that does not need licensing on or intellectual property. And we must never always think about that in that light, because we use internet to book our flights, we use internet to take exams in distant places, we use internet to do all kinds of things. The young people in Nigeria use it to even seek for jobs in international companies abroad and things like that. So I think there's so much more to the internet than those things that require licensing and things like that. And it's such a big, and I think that area represents a small part of what the internet represents to most people. Thank you.
Yeah, Alejandro, and then go here, and then we're going to go to the remote. Quickly.
Just very quickly, data points. The community, just to add to what Ernest is opening up very briefly, there's a long history of classification, study, and of the growth of communities on the internet. And so you have communities of interest, you have communities of local interest in particular, or global interest, and the more advanced stage is something called communities of project, where people actually not only come together to find out about something, but to actually do something. And I mean, in my school, it's almost mandatory to find a way to sneak in a quote of Manuel Castells, and in this case, I think it's very appropriate to remind also, or to capture what Patrice and Ernest have been asking about. There's something Castells calls the space of flows, el espacio de los flujos in Spanish, which means that you have the space locally organized, but you also have these global or at least extended spaces where people coexist and cooperate. And the paradox here then is, going back to your statement, when the internet becomes more local, it does not become less global. When the internet becomes more local, that means you represent more local content, you allow or facilitate more interactions between people who are close by because they are able to organize through the global internet to do things that are relevant only locally, but they can always access a global resource. I mean, a student of architecture in a very small, isolated town, that's one of our tired examples, does not have anyone in his town to talk about architecture. But he has thousands of small town students of architecture the world over who are interested in architecture and in solving problems that are local to small towns. So the internet becomes more local and it can become more global at the same time. And in fact, it becomes more local the more people have access to tools that are available globally to do the local work. So there's this local versus global is not a zero-sum game. You can actually have a cake that increases in size better the more it goes both ways, more global, more local.
So the false choice, it's not either or, it's both. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I just want to raise one point. To get an example we have in Senegal. we host the hub of a Pan-African network, which will link the African country and also India, and where we have telemedicine services and education. And this kind of network is very useful for our country because we will get information and support from India, and it enhances our cooperation, and also it enhances the cooperation between Africas, because inside Africa we have problem of connectivity in ourselves. So this is an example of which can allow us to develop content and also to get help from India to develop content. Thank you.
Thank you. Good examples. Remote.
Hello. We have a question coming from Mexico, from Luis Miguel. I'm pretty sure it's not the singer. And also from Kenya. This is the same question, so I'm going to rephrase it to reflect both questions. And the question is about the balance between infrastructure and content. Where should there be more investment? And personally, I also have a personal question. I want to add it to that balance, the global policy issue. Please note that I did not say regulation, but policy. What about if, for example, when a local legislation says that some content server data goes against some property issue, and that may start a kind of fight for content basement. I mean, for where the content will be based, where is more convenient to base the content. So the question for you about the investment is how the balance for an open global internet goes between infrastructure, content, and global policy. Where should we invest more?
I think it's very important that you understand that there are two completely different kind of realms. And the infrastructure, we have had traditionally a payment model which is based on access. So the user pays for access, and that's the telco model. And the difference in terms of the worlds, there's basically a world of, let's say, light and a world of darkness. And the world of light is the world where you have flat rates, and the world of darkness is where you have metered rates. So if you look at the development of the internet in the US, you have flat rates because students at the university could use it for free, and you had regional, dial-up at no additional cost than $10 a month for your basic local rates. While in Europe you had metered rates, time metered rates, and the mobile you have now especially also volume metered rates. When you come into the other realm, and that's the realm of, let's say, the over-the-top, you are not the user pays, but the advertiser pays. So you have completely different kind of economies, and also you have a different kind of situation in terms of what are the production costs. When you are putting infrastructure in, you scale slowly. When you are going into now something like Infogram, you know that it's scaled within 3 months, to 10 million users and more and more and more and more. And you have a buyout of $1 billion, for something which does not create a single cent of revenue. Okay, so when you're asking about where you should go investment and where one should look at it, one needs to basically look at those different kind of, completely different kind of business models and scenarios. The internet and content providers sit somewhere in between, and that's the reason why content providers struggle. And what Grace was telling before was very interesting, because it is in some ways add on to existing models, add on to existing already dominant content, let's say, types. And that is the real issue then. Are we having on the internet, besides user-generated content, a high concentration in terms of what I would call the Mount Everest or, Mont Blanc here, close by, in terms of that which everybody looks at, and then something which, and that is global, and everything else is local. So, and the question is how you're getting this evened out, and this is also the discussion which we had, with Eric and with Alejandro and here on the table. So the issue is how to even it out, and that's what we want to actually in the Internet Society and with the World Summit Award to do, to expand that.
And there's another side of that, which is the other question, which is as the data flows for the content providers, right, increase, where does the revenue come from to invest in upgrading the networks? And this is where Grace was talking about in Singapore, the telcos trying to move up the stack to develop, a variety of bundles of both transmission as well as value-added applications, content, or something else, right? So it's, this dichotomy actually, as it dissolves, raises business models questions across the board, right?
I'd like to add about the investment. Do you put it more on infrastructure or on content? I think you need to have the infrastructure first before you can have the content. So in Singapore, for example, we are rolling out fiber broadband, and the project will be finished. 95% of homes and offices will be fibered up by end of this year. So what it means is that now any company can come and buy fiber from the operating company and offer services on top of this. So there's education, there's telemedicine, and there's even gaming now. So they can then prioritize. If you're a gamer, you will go for this package. If you're in education, you go for this package. And it's a flat rate, so you pay $15 a month for the transmission as well as the content. Yeah. So I think that this is where Singapore is moving. Anyway. Thank you.
And Singapore, is leading the world in this, right? And I think we have to acknowledge that there are a lot of experiments, right? So Singapore is a model that's an experiment. Is it going to be successful there, and then can it scale elsewhere? I mean, these, I think, are some of the more important questions, because these are things we actually, honestly, don't know all the answers to. And what we need are the flexibilities to have lots of experiments to actually figure out how can we actually have the investment in more content, local content, networks, transmission, networks fit for purpose that are needed to adapt to different kinds of applications. Patrice. And then are there other hands here? Okay, we'll do Patrice, and we'll go up here for these questions. Go ahead.
Yes. When I heard infrastructure, I was not thinking of the physical plant, your photons and your electrons, and the structures that support it. I was thinking of information infrastructure, because the Internet as a global information system, the information infrastructure to manage the information in that environment is evolving. To give you an example, if you look at the data structure as the unique, persistently identifiable data structure, you can have within it metadata about the data to actually manage it at that level. And some of the metadata may be terms and conditions for access. So if you have mobile programs, say, for example, in the Internet, you can actually, if you get the data, you know what you can do with it, or you know where you can go to find out what to do with it. So the management, the information management structures that are being set up today allow for new ways of moving forward, and perhaps could help overcome some of the obstacles that people are perceiving, to have more flexible ways of doing business. And this is where you have the management at the bit level, so you can actually have those structures as active elements.
Thank you. We'll go for the two questions that were up here, and there's a third one over here. Okay, why don't we do, all the way over here. Great. You have to wave, right, to get my attention. Good. So we have 4 questions from the room, and then we'll answer those. So why don't we start here? Okay, go ahead. And introduce yourself, please.
Okay, thank you very much. First, my name is Victor Ndona. I'm from Cameroon. I'm here as part of the Next Generation Leader program of the Internet Society. So we have a discussion yesterday about the definition of the internet, because the basic definition, as many of us know, is the network of networks. And internet today is more than just a technology. It's a way of life. Do we need a new definition of internet? I would like to hear your point about that. And the second question is about infrastructure. When we are talking about global internet, we're also talking about global management of internet core resources. So me, in Cameroon, I'm a young internet entrepreneur dealing with web hosting and domain names. And as many of you know, there is a few number of internet registrars in Africa. So when I need a domain name, I have to deal with a company in the US. I don't want to name the company. And many of people in Cameroon also, when they need a domain name, they have to ask somebody who can be in France or in the US to pay for them for that domain name. And sometimes they put their website online, and when the time comes to expire, when the domain will expire, they will not be easy for that person to reach the one who pay with his credit card or something else. So my question is how to make the access of that global resources, especially domain names, available with a foundation of websites, local content, easy available to other parts of the world. Thank you. Sorry for my English. I'm a French speaking, basically. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. And we'll take all the questions and then address individuals. Yes, back here.
Okay, I'm Ludwig Freganik with the European Internet Exchange Association. For me, content, local content is very important, but it will be created if there is delivery possible. And in order to have to be able to deliver it, the infrastructure has to be there. So I'm wondering what in the parts of the world where the connectivity is not yet as developed as in other parts, what are the key challenges? Is it connectivity itself? Is it competition, market play, level playing field? And so what are the key challenges there, and how are they going to be addressed? Thank you.
Thank you. All the way over here in the corner.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm called Charles. I'm from the Kenyan chapter information. I'm very glad to present our society here. The global internet is very important, especially in our aspect. If you recall back, we had a problem with the elections. All the media were closed down, and it's only through this this social thing that people were able to understand and to know what was going on in Kenya. So very much for this global internet, and currently we are undergoing the same problem. We are approaching a similar problem again in the very near future, and we have issues which are trying to come up now, like censoring of data, of emails, etc., etc. So what I would ask the panel is this: is there a way of formulating universal policies and governance that would apply to all nations, so that people, wherever they are, or governments or officials should not be able to coin their own ways to block up the people for their own good? The second one is I'd like to ask is about safety. In our country, the internet has opened up because we have the fiber optic, which is started in Mombasa, and people are enthusiastic about using it. But in the end, find that there's so much content which is coming up. Some are good, some are not good. So I don't know what can be done by the internet society to try and see regulate about the flow of the content, whether the safe ones and not safe ones. Thank you.
Thank you.
Greetings. My name is Emani, and I'm from Niue in the Pacific, and I'm representing the Pacific Islands chapter. My name is Emani. Just looking at some of the things here in remote and isolated areas, like nearly all of us, our internet connectivity depends very much on reliable power, whatever power that is, if it's solar or generated from diesel or whatever. And with available infrastructure, our main connections for the most remote areas would have been satellite, which is very expensive. And I hear some talk about latency delays. We know all about this. And also, a lot of us are isolated. So how do we go about bringing the connectivity into these remote areas? In some of our countries, one country covers nearly 1/3 of the ocean that we cover at the moment. So the challenges are quite large. In terms of local content, I hear that local content created becomes a global content. In Niue, one of our projects right now is trying to preserve our language. We only have 1,300 people living on the island. 20,000 of us live in Auckland. 10,000 are spread right across the world. There's only 30,000+ of the whole Niuean population. So in terms of trying to hold on to our language that has already been reported by UNESCO as near extinct, it is quite critical that we move into using the internet and the ICT as a way to preserve the language. So it's good to hear some of the comments that we have here. And I'd like to close in saying that I think that local content can be created globally. Thank you.
Thank you. There was, Vint, go ahead.
Thank you. I actually wanted to respond just very quickly on one point.
Good.
Is it all right?
Absolutely.
This is to do with the access, satellite access. There is a new system which is scheduled to be launched in 2013. It's called O3B, which stands for Other 3 Billion. Google is one of the investors, so I'm an interested party. It has the property that it is planned to have 12 satellites in equatorial orbit at 8,000 kilometers, which is below what would normally be synchronous height. The round-trip time delay is 50 milliseconds. The data rates in the multiple spot beam system operate at 1 gigabit per second. I don't have data on the cost of the ground stations. It's a double antenna system because it has to track the satellite. It is intended to be accessible 40 degrees north and south of the equator, which covers a substantial portion of the Pacific. It also covers sub-Saharan Africa and other parts of the world, that even South America, for example, where interior access may be difficult. It isn't a solution to everything, but it may turn out to be a very important way of bringing high speed and relatively low delay to otherwise inaccessible parts of the world.
Thank you. That actually is very encouraging, because for a long time, Vin, as you know, people have been looking to satellite, which has been essential to bring connectivity to remote areas, but it's always been impaired in that it had high latency and bandwidth limitations. It was the best we could do, and it was great, but we needed to do better. And finally, you know, I've been following the other 3B as well, which it really now appears as though we are going to have a breakthrough that's a non-incremental change in satellite communications, specifically for remote areas, right? Yeah, it's not going to solve everybody's problem, but it's going to be a non-incremental step up from what we've had so far. That's great. Thanks. Was there another question before we go to the panel? Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. Olivier Crépin-Leblond. I'm the chair of the English chapter of the Internet Society, but I'll be speaking for myself. I heard a couple of panelists mention a bit earlier the characterization of traffic on a per-use type, one being the one package for gamers and one package for medical use, and also the bit management part. I have to raise a flag here, a red flag, I guess, on this, due to the fact that you would really be breaking the internet model. The problem with filtering traffic or managing traffic based on the use so on the application, etc., would totally stop any new applications from appearing. Because if you're not characterized, then you would be discriminated against, and therefore your traffic, your application would never be taken up by people who would not be able to use it. So that's one point I hope that the panel would consider. Thank you. Thank you.
Depending upon what some of the panelists how they'll respond, I may step out of my role as moderator. That is a really serious concern. The question is who makes those decisions, right? Because we know that latency is actually extremely important for some applications, not others. Right? In an ideal world, right, we don't have to worry about that. But where there's contention, if there's an application like voice over IP that requires very low latency, but there's another application like email that is insensitive to latency, the question is how can we match or mesh, to meet those needs if there's contention, but do it in a way that does not interrupt innovation, new applications, or end up in anti-competitive behavior, become a barrier. So it's really one of the most difficult questions of networks fit for purpose that is application up, not network down, right? And the question is how do we do that? Because until we have the world of no contention, we need to do something. So it's a really, really important question.
I understand latency is really important for a doctor operating at a distance, but do you know how important latency is for a hardcore gamer? My goodness.
No, latency is extremely important for a but also the reason I picked a very simple example of voice over IP versus email, right? And so we can maybe talk about that. One more here in the audience, then we'll come to the panel. Thanks.
This is not the moment to have a full debate about network neutrality. Christopher Wilkinson, chairman of the Internet Society chapters in Europe, speaking in my personal capacity, of course. I fully agree with Olivier Crépin-Leblanc's reservations. We are seriously concerned with the potential for abuse of precisely the discretion that Professor Pepper has just described. So please be extremely prudent about that argument, Professor Pepper. While I've got the floor, I just want to say something very quickly in response to the question from Cameroon. Some of us have argued that ICANN should proactively make sure that there are accredited registrars in all countries and in all languages. And it seems to me from the question we got from Cameroon, which is a country I love and have traveled in extensively, the question we got from Cameroon does imply that still, after all these years, ICANN does not have an accredited registrar in Cameroon. That really won't do. And I would ask the panel to pass that message on to ICANN. Thank you.
Thank you. I was actually going to ask the comment from Cameroon whether that was because of the inability to actually have a payment accepted, or was it because there was no registrar in Cameroon, or what exactly was because you said you'd have to find somebody in the US or France to pay for you, and was that because of a failure in the payment system or acceptance? Was this, in terms of understanding more about what the problem is that you're identifying?
Yes, thank you. It's because there is no accredited registrar in Cameroon. So you want a generic top domain name, you will have to deal with a foreign registrar. So there are just 5 in Africa, but it's easy to get access to registrar in France or in the US, because you can have a friend or a family there. We can be in direct contact with that registrar and pay for you. So there is no ICANN accredited registrar in Cameroon. And as you know, there is a CCTLD registry, but it's easy to the local domain name, the CCTLD name is the price is very higher than a generic top level domain. So people don't have enough money. They want generic one which is cheaper, but they can't easily get access to that. That was the concern. Thank you.
Thank you. Alejandro.
I believe this is very close to our closing round of remarks, looking at the time. I think that, again, a number of things that we have heard, there are modernizations or updates of discussions that we have had over the years, but there's again, for some of these things, there's a strong sense of déjà vu, though for some of these things we also know newer solutions. So I will start with Victor from Cameroon. One would expect for someone in Cameroon to identify this need of having a local registrar for generic top-level domain names and start a business. And maybe it's complicated to, I mean, I don't want to trivialize this. It's very complicated to establish a company, to get your capital, to get registered with the government, to be allowed to operate, to get even your sanity, your labor, occupational safety permits, even if it's a one-person office only. It's a bit surprising that an ISP or a telco has not done that, because that's in many other countries, companies who have some internet business, like telcos or ISPs, who are capitalized, who already have the facilities and some technical staff, can very easily do this. But the solution is local. I think that what Christopher Wilkinson has said, that ICANN should go and proactively establish the registrars, is completely against ICANN's mandate. Let me tell you, Chris, I will never again. I will interrupt you forcefully with physical force the next time I hear the words ICANN mission creep uttered by you. I will physically destroy the server where you write that email, where you complain about ICANN mission creep, because that's exactly the way ICANN or mission creep. And for those who don't speak English natively, I learned that mission creep means the expansion of an organization beyond its mission. So that's, so I mean, I guess someone will thank you for that. But the thing is, again, many of the problems that we face when we face the expansion of the internet are problems that exist for things that are not the internet. If it's hard to establish a registrar in Cameroon because it's hard to establish a company in Cameroon, or if it's hard to operate a registrar in Cameroon because it's hard to get payments accepted yeah, you're raising your hand, so.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. The problem is not creating a registrar in Cameroon. My question is the management of a global resources. I can set up a policy to become a registrar, and that policy don't take in account the economic situation of company in Cameroon. You can have a e-business company there, but I just take an example to become a registrar. There is the point about insurance. It's very difficult for a company in Cameroon to fix that point concerning the insurance. So I can have to be, when making a policy of registrar, taking care of the global national situation in different countries. It's not just about creating a company.
Again, I don't want to go into a lot of gory detail here, but if you have that problem, you have it with a car dealership, you have it with a company that sells car tires, or with a company that sells railway steel rails. The global market for registrars has to get some level of regulation, and will get there at a level of consumer safety. You would be complaining about a registry in Sierra Leone or in any other neighboring country if, for lack of money and lack of insurance, they were operating in a way that hurt your users. So again, these difficulties are not specific to the internet. They are more general. What happens with the internet is that they become more stark. They become more urgent because the internet allows us to do things that we would want to do real fast in order to compete globally, and the obstacles are local. If a registrar is important for the development of the internet in Cameroon, we should help you, but it's a local thing to find a way for the government to subsidize, for larger companies to cooperate, and so forth. So extending this, an alliance of content producers, for example, the Francophone Africa, English-speaking West Africa or East Africa, have a great opportunity still to bring together companies and universities and so forth to do this, these things with alliances. And I will say, network neutrality, I think, is vital. I don't think there is anything wrong with what Grace said in principle, that you can have a company that offers a gamers package or a Facebook package, but it's not selling the internet. And someone has to tell the users, if you buy the gamers package, you're buying the gamers package, but you are not getting access to the internet if you only get one port open, and you can only access the gamer sites. That's what makes the deal less expensive for that package. And I'll end up with one more. Where these things come together, Victor, Chris, Grace, and others, is they come in national integral plans to help the expansion of the information society, which includes the internet, but sometimes are more telecommunications agendas or information technology industry or software development industry agendas, and leave aside society and leave aside the internet itself. They are not built on an internet paradigm of horizontality, of creativity, of permissionless innovation. There's a great temptation. Many of our countries are involved in projects of writing up and officializing by the government something called a digital agenda, which is the current name for information society national programs. And I think that many of these are doomed to failure because they are not based on an internet paradigm, and they are not based on major societal inclusion, including multi-stakeholder governance. But that's how you do it. But if you don't include society, they are doomed. So we have to look at a very few examples which have already been successful, instead of looking at the digital agenda national plans, which look good on paper but have not yet been implemented.
Thank you. We're just going to come down the line here for the final wrap-up comments. So, Ernest?
The gentleman from Cameroon talked about the definition of internet. It's difficult to be defining internet when one of the fathers of internet is in the room. But it seems what he's implying is that internet has reached a stage where you have both what I call a technical definition and perhaps a functional definition. A technical definition is the definition that he talked about of a system of connected computers all over the world, linked by some protocols, while a functional definition might say that internet today is more of a medium for free dissemination of knowledge and about creating and consuming information or content. So I think if that helps, that is my own take on that. For my closing comments, I just want to emphasize the issue about the fact that internet has become something very useful and is also becoming widespread even in Africa, and that in Nigeria, the very young people are very active using the internet for all kinds of things. And I think that should be encouraged into the future. And also, I mentioned something, Robert, about the involvement of governments in infrastructure provision. I also talked about the issue about security on the internet and the fact that that is critical even for keeping governments at bay in terms of getting involved in protecting the cyber borders of a particular country. I think it's something that we'll continue to talk about into the future. Thank you very much.
Let me just try to pick up on some of the questions. Breaking the internet model. I hear that in so many different guises, as if you have this mold, and if it doesn't fit this really rigid structural view of what the internet is, whoops, it's not the internet, okay? Now, if you look at it as the open architecture, which I made some general comments about earlier, that's based on policies and procedures that allow this global information system to evolve, then notions in the past, which may still be very useful, like, for example, end-to-end. Often people say, well, that's the internet. Well, yes, that's a very important principle, but the integration of the elements in the more mobile environment. For example, Vint and Bob did their World of Nobots. I mentioned that earlier. So you have new ways of implementing more dynamic systems rather than allowing for just the static structures. And I won't wander down the net neutrality debate. I spent way too much time on that. But that touches on some of the more rigid views of what it means to be the internet. Now, there was the Pacific Island. Vint, you mentioned about the power source and the satellites coming on board. This came up when we were at the Internet Governance Forum in Nairobi last fall as well. We had just had safari out and looking at the animals, and they had their cell phones, but they told me to bring back one message. Please try to get reliable solar power that's light, flexible, and easily accessible and cheap. Now that's doable, and I think some of the folks I've talked to about that since, there are some implementations now that you can buy, but we could do a lot better. Now, there was a censorship of data. I believe there's someone from Kenya had raised that as an issue. Last fall, I participated in an exercise here in Geneva where they were talking about child online protection. Some were willing to sacrifice basic freedoms and privacy to protect the weakest among us. Now, information on the internet is in digital form. Now, in order to know that this little bit sequence is a bank account and this little bit sequence is child online porn, you have to really have a more elaborate system of filtering and managing that information at a level that I think most people would be very uncomfortable with. So one of the things that emerged from the discussions that we had among the group assembled was that teaching people how to teach their children proper use of internet capabilities and to be able to think critically about their choices on what they're going to do. So the internet has within its architecture the ability to bring in new applications that would allow parents and the community at large to have this environmental space, this learning environment, where we share our notions and allow different experiences in different parts of the world, different communities of interest, to be able to learn from one another and perhaps solve the real problems of everyday life.
Thanks, Patrice. Peter.
I'm a little bit torn how to end this. I think 20 years of internet society should give us a different kind of point of view than saying, okay, latency for gamer and latency for doctor. I don't care. I think that I do care. I think it makes a difference. And I think one needs to go into a situation where that issue is not created as a taboo, but that one really looks at what we are moving into when, on the one hand, the internet becomes or is the pervasive medium for delivering services in e-health, and life is at stake, or the same kind of infrastructure is delivering entertainment and leisure is at stake. And I would think that we need to go into that kind of discussion openly and fairly and also in a very considerate manner. It's happy that Vint is in the room because he has been a patron of the World Summit Award from the first year in 2003, 2004. And he knows, as many of you in this room knows, what are the struggles for content producers, especially those who are producing local content, in finding proper payment, proper economic models, proper business models. And it does not make a difference if you're in Accra or if you're in Oakland, you have the same issue. And in that sense, I think it's important that we see the internet not just purely from a functional and also from a technological point of view, but also as an economic space where critical cultural generation of high quality content need separate models than just the university model of interlinking books in a library. And I think that this brings me to the final point. I think we need to, with 20 years of ISOC, we need to put in much more creativity in those issues than just going on and with the mantras, of, let's say, the founding, 20 years. And we need to address the issues at hand. I have a son who is very much on the rise. He's 18, 19 years old. He has his business since he was 18 as a web shop, and he's a member of the Pirate Party in Austria. So if you're looking at Germany and other countries, the pirates are now skyrocketing in popularity and overtaking the Greens and the Free Democrats and things like this. And the really interesting thing about this is that he has a very, very strong belief that the ethical issues come first, but that they need to be addressed by people who are looking at it from the ground up. And with the World Summit Award, we want to look at the issues of good, high-quality content creation from the ground up and have innovative models, because I think there's a good use of making internet free for everybody who is under 25 or is going to school. But that does not mean that it must be free for everybody at the same time for every kind of use. And so we have to look at that, of this kind of economic dimension in basically creating resources for high-quality contents, and that's a key issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. We are winding down in the last few minutes of the session. Grace.
It is true, Singapore experiments all the time, and we take what we proven successful. I think in our agenda, the digital agenda is the internet is the digital agenda. While I've talked about entertainment, I think that we have been one of the earliest countries in the world to have broadband. We're also one of the earliest countries in the world to have a parents advisory committee that advises parents how to use the internet and how to teach children and parents to look at internet critically and the media. And over the last 20 years, this has evolved, of course. And the new thing that has come now, we'll have a new committee on which I will sit as well, and it's called the New Media Literacy Committee, and it will look at some of these issues. We're also very concerned that the silver generation also have a chance to access the internet. I think that we are an aging population, and so, facility must be provided for the elderly to be able to access or understand the content. Yeah, I agree with Patrice about teaching children thinking critically. I think at the end of the day, it is allowing different experiences for all of us and to be able to access all of them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will just raise 2 points. Just to reinforce what Peter says about the need to bring the opportunity of economic model of internet globally. because it's now concentrated only to the G20 countries. And about coming back to the infrastructure issue, I think the supplies create its own demand, and that's what happened in Africa. Infrastructure is moving forward. We have a lot of projects on infrastructure, and we're happy that the World Bank changed their mind about the government investing in infrastructure, because years ago they did not allow government to invest on telco infrastructure, and now they changed their mind, and I think it's important, and it will change the games. And to really conclude, my hope after 20 years of ISOC and being part of the ISOC since the beginning, my hope is at the beginning of ISOC we talk about passport of internet, and I think most of the people get their passport. What they need now is a visa to be able to play the same game that those who are from the Western country. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric.
And I will be a good host and be extremely brief so you can keep us ending on time. And I would like to build on what Ndeye said, in that we brought up a number of local issues which I too could wax for hours on, like network neutrality and differential pricing, and whether that's a good idea or a bad idea. Read my writings and you'll know my position on that. But what this highlights is that local decisions in the internet have global impact. That a decision in one country to impose bandwidth caps without being transparent, or another country to have different kinds of applications allowed, or to have blocking in a particular country, or to have particular cybersecurity measures that, the way I put it is, we do give police the gun, but we don't expect them to shoot the citizens. But we do give them guns. So, there are shades of gray here, but that they do have global impact. And the Internet Society has been pretty adamant about keeping the global Internet a global Internet, which is why the Internet Society does take positions on these issues.
Thank you, Eric. So before we get to Laurie and some housekeeping, I just want to thank the panel. Thank the participants in the room. You've been with us for 2.5 hours now. It's been, I think, a really great conversation. Thank all of our remote participants. How many did we end up with?
We had 130 at the top of the viewers.
That's great. I want to thank the interpreters. That's a really hard job. And whoever's there with their hands. Making this work above us is really difficult. We all really, really appreciate it. So if we could thank the panel with me, thank you all very much. This will be posted. It was live and streamed. And Laurie.
I'm not sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Bob took over most of what I had to say, which was a many thank yous. So I will just simply remind everybody that if you have a ticket that looks like this for the gala tonight, it's at the Intercon starting at 7 p.m. Unfortunately, it is sold out, and so hopefully you have a ticket, because it's going to be a unique event recognizing founders and innovators and celebrating the Internet Society. The other thing I want to remind the very few women in this room is that there is a women's network breakfast tomorrow morning at which you better ask questions, since no women asked questions this afternoon. It starts at 8 a.m. It is on the 5th floor of this building. And then finally, the concurrent sessions on IPR and development and more technical issue, there are 3 sessions. They start at 9:30. So I wish you all a very good evening, and again, thank you all for participating.
If there's somebody who does not have a ticket, I have one for free. So come and get the ticket. First come.